I shouldn't be here. I should not have had to travel over 4,000 miles to come and speak to you about the untimely death of my little girl, a child whose life was ended due to a drug-induced psychosis caused by the unnecessary drugging with antidepressants. And she was not the only victim. We are all victims. We have lost our daughter. Our surviving daughter has lost her only sibling. Candace's death was needless. My name is Mathy Milling Downing. I am a teacher, I am an advocate, but I am a mother. You couldn't possibly know what it feels like to see your daughter happily curled up in her father's arms laughing, only to check on her an hour or so later and find her hanging from the valance of her bed. She was 12 years old, and she had her whole life in front of her. We had no warning that such an outcome was even possible. Candace had always been a happy, healthy child. She would never have intentionally hurt us this way. She was an honor student. She was an athlete. She was on swim team every summer. She played soccer, basketball, and lacrosse while in school. Everybody loved her and called her their friend. She was the one they turned to when they were sad because she always had a smile. Candace had a knack for making everyone feel better. That was her gift. When she died, school was closed. Her service had to be held in the school gymnasium as the more than 1,000 people that attended her service couldn't fit in our church. We had had a concern about Candace's anxiety over taking tests at school. She would study, know the material, and then do poorly on exams. This was partially due to her horrible left-handed writing, which teachers could not decipher, but it was also due to her inability to recall information in this type of setting. She would freeze. When I voiced these concerns to her pediatrician, he was not alarmed. She came from a loving, supportive family and a very nurturing school environment, and he felt that the situation would improve on its own. But that if I remained concerned, then I should take her to a child psychiatrist. It was the biggest mistake of my life and my daughter's. We were not in the psychiatrist's office 10 minutes when we were handed a sample pack of Zoloft, the miracle drug, the drug that brought up images of happy bouncing blobs surrounded by pretty fluttering butterflies. What could it hurt? I'd read the brochure while I was sitting in the doctor's office, and the only warnings were that initially it might cause a little dizziness or an upset stomach, nothing to worry about. The doctor handed me a sample packet that was in the shape of a fan, which had pills in rows of pastel colors, each color signifying a different strength. Candace was to take the little green pills at the top, and the doctor told me I could give the rest to my husband. That's another story. The packet contained no warnings at all. Where was our screening? Where was our blood test to see if the medication could even be tolerated? It was not until we had an autopsy performed following her death that we learned that Candace had been unable to metabolize this drug, and it had been building up in her system for quite a while. We were never warned that SSRIs or antidepressants had been found to cause worsening anxiety, insomnia, restlessness, akathisia, or severe irritability and agitation, or ultimately irresistible urges to commit suicide. We didn't know that many families had been voicing their concerns about these drugs since the FDA hearings in 1991, the year my daughter was born. We didn't know that 2 out of 4 of every 100 children risked having this happen, and that's probably a low estimate. At the time of Candace's death, there was no black box warning. There was no disclaimer of possible suicidality in children under 18 years of age, and that was later raised in 2006 to under 25 years in age. Candace didn't need this drug. In fact, she was fighting off all the ill effects of antidepressants at the same time that the dedicated teachers of her school had created test accommodations to lessen her anxiety. At the beginning of 7th grade, the psychiatrist decided that her dose should be doubled. I was not in agreement, but he commented to me, "What are you worried about? Kids take 100 to 200 milligrams a day without any problems. Well, Candace had a fatal problem on 100 milligrams. Early on, she had told me that what really reduced her anxiety was plenty of physical activity, but I trusted the doctor. What about drug transparency? After all, isn't the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm? And again, what about drug transparency? We learned through depositions that Candace's psychiatrist was being paid by Pfizer to push sales for Zoloft and had received tens of thousands of dollars to do so. An article written on drug transparency in Business Week entitled Medical Conflicts, Doctors Under the Influence speaks specifically about what happened to us and our daughter. Why is the standard now greed before need? In January of 2004, Candace had a severe reaction after ingesting an additional pill. This same wise doctor had told her that if she ever got nervous about an upcoming test at school, she could take an extra Zoloft pill at night. She became loud, irritable, paranoid, and began experiencing tremors. I called the pediatrician, who said to call poison control. They told me to take her to the hospital, that she was experiencing serotonin syndrome. There she would be monitored. Candace became very nauseous and vomited the pill as soon as entering the ER. While in the hospital, Candace received both Versed and Ativan intravenously. Her heart rate doubled, her pulse went up, and she began running a fever. Instead of monitoring, she ended up in pediatric intensive care for 4 days. I begged them not to give her any more drugs, and they told me they couldn't make that promise. Her hallucinations were so bad, so scary, that I had to lay in the hospital bed with her. When we asked what was happening to our daughter, the doctors told us, we have no idea. The hospital never informed us that they had enlarged her heart or that her vision was ruined, never to be the same. She never again slept through the night or ate another meal. They also managed to give her another dose of Zoloft at 4 times her prescribed dosage and then sent her home when her vital signs finally stabilized. Her life was being destroyed, and I couldn't stop it. We left with no warnings or precautions, only to see the psychiatrist on Friday. Candace attended school that day. He had told us not to give her another Zoloft until he saw her. When we went to see him after school, Candace worked on homework until we saw him. She finished her map for the following week. He thought she looked great. She was happy, she wasn't anxious, she had taken a math test that day at school and had done quite well. He said to come back in 2 weeks and not to take any more Zoloft at that time. Candace did not live another 24 hours. At the time, we were also unaware that sudden decreases or discontinuation of a medication like this could prove fatal. I guess that was unimportant, unnecessary information to share with families. Following her sister's death, my surviving daughter experienced focusing issues at school, and I was notified about the schools concerned. They wanted her checked. Perhaps she had ADD and needed medication. She'd always been an honor student, and her grades were slipping. No kidding, she was traumatized. I would have been more concerned if Caroline had not had a reaction. I made the appointment, but stipulated beforehand drugs were not an option. I had lost one daughter to antidepressants and was not about to lose another. She tested as gifted in several areas except for repeating random series of numbers. Given the history, they were in agreement she was reacting to her sister's sudden horrific death. Therapy was suggested, but it was a moot point since Caroline had begun art therapy within a week or so after her sister's death and continued all the way through high school during the next 3 years. She ended high school with honors and was class speaker. In May of 2009, the Washington Post ran a rather lengthy article entitled, "After Depression, One Rallied, One Did Not." While neither of my girls suffered from depression, the article was about whether or not to treat children with antidepressants, even for off-label uses, and the possible outcomes. The fact that Caroline thrived without the use of any drugs, continue on as an honor student all through college, is a testimony to the benefits of therapy without use of medication. People need to work through their feelings and not mask them by medicating with deadly chemicals. I was thankful that my surviving daughter was aware of the fraudulent practices when her entire class at college was screened for mental health issues. Without exception, Every student was told they had suicidal tendencies and needed treatment and medication. This was in no small part to the openly vague questions on the survey, sponsored, of course, by the pharmaceutical industry. What if the students hadn't realized it was nothing more than a ruse to create a wider drug market? What if my daughter Caroline had not been proactive at school? I'm quite honored to be here with the like-minded. Ironically, Denmark was the final stop on the last trip I would ever take with my daughter, and she loved it. I've kept her mementos from that trip. Then in November of 2007, I was approached by the Danish magazine Community for an article entitled The Lost Generation, which tells Candace's story. In Norway, the documentary Prescription Suicide, a film about the adverse reactions of antidepressants that happened not only to our family but to 5 others, was shown nationally 2 times in one summer. This documentary has been shown all over the world repeatedly. Stories about Candace have been featured all over the world and nationally on every television station. Candace represents what can go horribly wrong if we are not informed. We have a right to informed consent. We didn't get that. Innocent children continue to needlessly be killed by these drugs. Please join us in helping to right the wrongs by ending the unnecessary drugging of our youth and help us to promote safer, more effective ways to deal with children in crisis or unease. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. God bless.